Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We are looking at Imam Ghazali's definition, classification of different types of reasons or rationality, and we look at the first meaning of reason or rationality. Now we come to the second meaning of rationality, and it's a bit of this meaning is sort of covered in the first one, because when he tried to defend the first definition, he had to reply to objections from within his own school, which basically doesn't accept the first definition because of its own reasons. And some of them we did allude to. And most Ashaira actually defined reason in the second sense. And Imam Ghazali doesn't deny that the meaning of reason in the second sense, but what he tried to defend was that the meaning of reason in the first sense is the basic meaning. Reason as a faculty, reason as a ghariza, reason as a characteristic. And what he said to his own fellow Ashaira is that we don't have to, when we talk about reason in the sense of faculty or a power or characteristic, we don't have to assume that that power is a power in itself. That power is sustained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at each and every moment. And how does he sustain it? We have no clue of it. So just accepting reason as a power doesn't imply or doesn't mean that we're accepting it as a self-sufficient power or self-subsisting power. There's nothing self-subsisting anywhere in the world. So when we talk about these things, we talk about them within the overall assumptions of Islamic worldview. Anyway, so now we come to the second definition, hiya al-ulum. So this, according to this definition, rationality is a type of knowledge actually. On the face of it, it's a bit strange to call rationality as a knowledge, because as we saw in the first meaning of rationality is a power, or rationality is an instrument. But we'll see what they say about the second meaning. So reason can be understood in terms of a type of knowledge, not every knowledge, a type of knowledge which comes into existence, تخرج إلى الوجود, which comes into existence when a child comes of an age, becomes able to judge, able to differentiate between different things. And there are three things, and this knowledge consists of three things. Imam Ghazali mentions here two, but from those two, the third is, in those two, the third is implicit anyway. And those who have written commentary on this, they have mentioned the third one. For example, Zabidi, which I've followed a bit. So الثاني هي العلوم التي تخرج إلى الوجود في ذات الطفل المميز بجواز الجائزات واستحالة المستحيلات. So the second type of meaning of rationality, according to Imam Ghazali, is it's a type of knowledge, and it's a type of knowledge which consists of جواز الجائزات واستحالة المستحيلات, and the third one I'll mention in a minute. So the second type of second meaning of rationality, second meaning or second conception of rationality. So we use rationality sometime to mean a specific type of knowledge. Specific type of knowledge. And that type of knowledge consists in three things. بجواز الجائزات واستحالة المستحيلات. So جواز الجائزات, that's one. The second is استحالة المستحيلات. obviously we're talking about human knowledge. And the third one, which Imam Ghazali doesn't mention here, but it is employed by his other two definitions, and which Zabedi, Al-Bilgirami, Mustafa Zabedi, Murtaza Zabedi, in his commentary on it here mentioned it. It is وَوُجُوبُ الْوَاجِبَاتِ. وَوُجُوبُ الْوَاجِبَاتِ. And these are type of knowledges which actually constitute the structure of human reason. So they are not knowledge in the normal sense of the structure of human reason. In for example, Kantian terms of view, these are types of knowledge which are constitutive of the very concept of rationality. Because human rationality, the crux of human rationality is based on consistency, really. And what people call logic, really, is the formalization of this. So all the first principle of rationality really are drawing the implications of the concept of consistency, because if you don't believe in consistency, or if you are not consistent, then rationality doesn't work. So in order for rationality to work, you need to take heed to the requirements of consistency. So all first principle, like the law of non-contradiction, for example, are the details of this requirement, the requirement of consistency. And Imam Ghazali here formulate that in this constitutive structure of rationality in terms of three types of knowledges. First one is what did we say? The first one was Jawaz al-Jaizat. So the things which rational knowledge consider, either they are possible type of knowledge, and number two are istihalatul mustahilat, and the third one are impossible, and the third one which and the third one which Imam Ghazali doesn't mention, but which follows from the combination of first and second, is wujubul wajibat. That's what we call in English necessary knowledge. So rationality consists of a basic knowledge, and this basic knowledge is the knowledge of the difference between possible, impossible, and necessary. Possible is something which reason can only determine. It can be true and it can be false, but reason cannot, without actual experience or information, reason cannot determine whether it's true or false, because it can be true, it can be false. Of course, one thing cannot be true or false at the same time, but that's something else. That's mustahilat, impossible. So this reason can determine in advance, not because it can know things in advance, but because it knows that what it cannot know. So reason cannot understand things which are same thing being true and false at the same time. So those are impossible. That something can't be true or false at the same time, like proposition, for example. And wujubul wajibat, then there are necessary things. So if something is true, then it is true. You can't say at the same time it's false. So that's the exact opposite of impossible. So when we deny the impossibility of something, then then we are also proclaiming the necessity of something. So these three types of knowledge, we can say that that's what rationality is in the second sense. So rationality is knowing the basic structure of how reason works. Now, people have implicit knowledge of that, everybody, but when we codify that in logic and things, that become explicit, some of it. So that's type of knowledge, the knowledge of these three basic things. And this can either be considered as innate knowledge, which is sort of dormant potentially in human mind, but when a child comes of age and able to differentiate between things, this dormant knowledge become actual knowledge. So we can either consider it as innate knowledge in the way Plato does, but we can also, on the other hand, think of it as something we call structure of our mind, the way our mind works. And from that is, if we know how our mind works, from there we get three basic things: that our mind and its power, which we call rationality, work on the principle of consistency, and consistency consists of the three things: possibility. So there are things which are possible, and then there are things which are impossible, and there are things which are necessary, according to this reason, the way it thinks. But these three things only tells us about how this rationality works. It doesn't tell us anything about the external world, unless you believe that reason is actually determining the external world as well. Okay, and that's another topic altogether. So this is the second sense of the meaning of rationality, that is the knowledge which basically consists in knowing the first principle on which are necessary for the working of reason to start with. So Sani, the second type of second conception of rationality, or second meaning of rationality, is that some people mean by rationality the knowledge of the basic structure or basic principle on which rationality works. And a child has an implicit, innate, every child has implicit and innate understanding of that, which becomes explicit when they come of age, or we can consider it as merely, and that's my addition, my 2 cents, that we can either consider it as an innate knowledge, the way Imam is saying, or we can consider it as the structure of our mind. And this type of knowledge consists of, according to Imam, 2 things, but as we said, from 2 we can sort of glean the third thing as well, knowing what this difference between the possibility, impossibility, and necessity. These 3 things. So every human child, implicitly or innately, even though innate and implicit has a different meaning, I'm just using them in a loose sense, knows what is possible, what is impossible, what is necessary, not because we know the basic structure of being, but because we know the basic structure of our own rationality, and we can only know what our rationality allows us to know. Okay. So now, and then he goes on to give some example. Kalil bain al-isnayn aksar min al-wahid. So knowledge that one is more than 2. One is more than 2. Sorry, 2 is 2 is more than 1. So this is an example of necessary knowledge, and it is also example, you can change it into an example of impossible knowledge, that one cannot be more than 2. وأن الشخص الواحد لا يكون في مكانين في وقت واحد, or of one same person cannot be at 2 places at the same time. That's the impossibility. As وهو الذي عناه بعض المتكلمين. So this conception is the one with which Ashari Mutakallimin has, some of them at least, has concentrated their energies on, or has dealt with. And Zubaydi says that كأنه it is as if Here he is referring to Imam al-Haramain, his teacher himself. And so according to this definition, definition of this conception of knowledge, rationality is a type of knowledge which consists in some necessary knowledge, some types of necessary knowledge. And that type is basically, as we saw, the type of knowledge which is able to differentiate between the possibility and impossibility and necessity. And Imam Ghazali doesn't deny that. He only says that this is just one meaning of rationality or reason. You cannot reduce meaning rationality to just this meaning, because the basic meaning of rationality as an instrument and as power is something which, on which every other sense actually basically relies on. And وهو أيضا صحيح في نفسه. So this conception of rationality is also correct, because this knowledge is there. This knowledge of the basic principle of human rationality is there, either implicitly or explicitly. And to call it rationality is also obvious. I don't think it's obvious, because we had to explain why it's called knowledge, because prima facie, or the obvious thing to do is to say that knowledge is a product, not the instrument. So Imam Ghazali is saying that وهو الذي ينام بعض المتكلمين حيث قال في حد العقل انه بعض العلوم الضروريه كالعلم بجواز الجائزات واستحاله المستحيلات وهو ايضا صحيح في نفسه لان هذه العلوم موجوده. These knowledge of these basic principles is there, either implicitly or explicitly. So this type of to call it rationality is fine. And to call it rationality is obvious why we call it rationality. And what I'm saying is it's not very obvious, because aql or reason is basically an instrument of knowledge, as we saw in the first definition. And through process, it gives us a product. And that product is called knowledge. So if you are calling rationality itself knowledge, then it must be only a specific type of knowledge. So it's not very obvious why you call it knowledge. But after the way we have explained, it becomes more palpable or more acceptable to call it knowledge. And this type of knowledge, a basic type of knowledge, the knowledge of the basic principle which are constitutive of our reason, without which reason doesn't function in the first place. And this knowledge comes in three garbs. Innate knowledge when we are born. If we do believe in innate knowledge, not everybody believes in it. So child has this knowledge, but as something dormant in their mind. It's not activated until they become, they come of age and are able to differentiate between things. The better way is to consider it as a part of our structure of our mind. But then you don't even have to call it knowledge. Anyway, so that's the first sense in which we can call it knowledge. The second sense in which we can call it knowledge is implicit. Everybody implicitly know these principles, because whoever is a rational person knows that if they are using their reason, they have to be consistent. They can't call something true and false at the same time. For example, that's obvious. They can't call one is 1 and 1 is 1 and 1 plus 1 is 2 and then say that and define the meaning of plus and then say that 2 is less than 1, for example. This is impossible. So this is what consistency is, and the consistency basically boils down to three things: knowledge of what is possible, what is impossible, and what is necessary. And that's all related to the structure of our rationality. So everybody implicitly know that. And then there are people who won't try to make this knowledge explicit, so we call them logicians and other names. You can grammarians also do some of this work, and also rhetoricians and all those things. So that's why we can call it knowledge. So we agree with Imam Ghazali that we can call it knowledge, but it's hard to believe that it's obvious why we call it knowledge. It wasn't obvious at all before we actually try to make it obvious. So Imam Ghazali goes on to say that what is happening? وذلك هو أيضا صحيح في نفسه, like this type of knowledge. To call rationality, to say that rationality is this type of necessary knowledge is fine, as long as we know that this is not the only meaning and this is not the basic meaning, because this knowledge is there. And to call it reason is also obvious. And we said that it's not obvious, but it's obvious once we try to make it obvious. The only problem is with those people who deny the knowledge, deny that reason is a power, or reason is a faculty. And one thing I should mention, I actually mentioned in the first discussion as well, but actually they have some problem with this word al-ghariza, the power, not in its normal Arabic meaning, but its philosophical meaning, because some philosophers say that power is something which is self-subsistent and which is the property of the matter. So obviously you can, and it is produced by matter, on its own. So that's obviously denying the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you don't have to have that conception of power. And that's what Imam Ghazali is saying. So we shouldn't deny that the reason in its basic meaning means a power through which we get necessary knowledge, power through which, not this type of necessary knowledge, because that type of necessary knowledge which we mentioned in the second definition, that's actually constitutive of rationality. Without this type of knowledge, rationality doesn't even work. But once it works, then it can add to this with other type of necessary knowledge, and from that necessary knowledge we can actually go on to mediated knowledge through using the principles of inference. That's how we acquire knowledge. Okay, so what Imam Ghazali is saying, that it's all right to call this second type of knowledge, this second meaning of rationality, as a description of rationality. What is not correct is to deny that rationality is a power. And when we call rationality power, we are not saying that it is power which emanates from our mind, or we are not saying that it is the power which is the intrinsic property of our mind. We are not saying that, and we are not saying that this power is created by our body or our mind without reference to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because no Muslim can say that. Okay, so that's misconception gone. We can call it power in just normal sense of the word, in which what I'm saying is my speech, even though I haven't created this speech. Allah has produced a power in me to create, and that power doesn't work in itself, but it's always work with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those are metaphysical issues and nothing to do with what we are talking about here. So what is not acceptable is those people who think that rationality just consists in knowing what is possible, impossible, and necessary. These are the basic principles of rationality, but rationality is more than that. Otherwise, we wouldn't know much. Okay, so this was the second definition of second conception of, or second meaning of rationality, or second conception of rationality. Next time, inshallah, we'll move on to the third conception of rationality, or third meaning of rationality. Okay, thank you.